knew was about to destroy them. But before we understand how, we need to rewind. 30 years earlier, Manila, Philippines, 1994. Margaret Santos was 31 years old, a registered nurse at Manila General Hospital. She worked the overnight shift in the ICU because it paid more. She sent half her salary home to her parents in the province, saved the rest. She had a plan: move to America, get certified, build a life. In 1996, she got her visa, landed in San Francisco with 2 suitcases and $600. Started working as a home health aide while studying for her California nursing license. That's how she met Richard Chen. He was 54, a widower. His wife had died of breast cancer 2 years earlier. He had Parkinson's disease, early stage. His hands shook. His balance was off. He needed help. His children, Daniel and Victoria, hired Margaret. $12 an hour, 6 days a week. Margaret showed up every morning at 7, made breakfast, helped Richard with physical therapy, drove him to doctor's appointments, listened when he talked about his late wife, about his business, about his kids who called twice a month and visited twice a year. For 4 years, Margaret was invisible. The help, the nurse, the woman who made sure Richard took his pills. Then, everything changed. Richard's Parkinson's got worse. The tremors, the rigidity, the falls. Daniel and Victoria hired round-the-clock care, but they didn't visit more. They just paid more. And Margaret stayed, not because of the money, because Richard had become her friend, her family, the person who asked about her day, who remembered her birthday, who told her she deserved better than a 1-bedroom apartment and a 12-year-old car. One evening, 6 years into working for him, Richard asked her something. "Margaret, if I asked you to marry me, would you say yes?" She thought he was confused. The medication sometimes made him say strange things. "Mr. Chen, you don't mean that." "Yes, I do. I'm 74 years old. I'm dying. And the only person who's made me feel like a human being instead of a burden is you. I want to take care of you, the way you've taken care of me." Margaret said no, 3 times, because it felt wrong. Because she didn't want people to think she was using him. Because she knew what Daniel and Victoria would say. But Richard kept asking. And finally, she said yes. Not for money, for love. The quiet kind. The kind built on 4 a.m. conversations and holding hands during tremors and staying when everyone else left. They married in a small ceremony. Just them and 2 witnesses. Richard changed his will, left Margaret the house, a trust fund, enough to live comfortably. Daniel and Victoria found out 3 days later. They didn't come to the wedding. They came to contest it. "You manipulated him," Victoria said. "You took advantage of a sick man." "He's my father," Daniel said, "and you're nobody." Richard defended Margaret, told his children he'd made his choice, that Margaret had earned everything he'd given her. They stopped visiting entirely. For 2 years, Margaret cared for Richard. The disease got worse. He couldn't walk, couldn't feed himself, couldn't speak without slurring. But he was still there, still Richard, still the man who'd chosen her. When he died, Margaret held his hand, whispered that she loved him, that she'd take care of everything. 3 days later, she sat in that conference room and learned that Richard's will had been changed 1 week before his death. A new will, leaving everything to Daniel and Victoria, nothing to Margaret. The lawyer said Richard had signed it, had been of sound mind, had made his choice. Margaret knew it was a lie. Richard could barely hold a pen in his final weeks, could barely speak. There was no way he'd signed anything. But proving it was different. She had no money for lawyers, no proof, no power, until she remembered something Richard had told her 2 months before he died. "Margaret, I recorded something, in case this happens, in case they try something. It's in the safe. The code is your birthday." Margaret went to the house Daniel and Victoria had already listed for sale, used the key she still had, opened the safe. Inside was a video. Richard, recorded 6 months before he died, still coherent, still clear. She watched it. Then she called a lawyer, not just any lawyer, the best estate attorney in San Francisco. a woman named Patricia Wong who took cases pro bono when she smelled injustice. Patricia watched the video, then smiled. "We're going to bury them." 3 months later, they were back in court. Not a quiet conference room, a real courtroom, with a judge and evidence. Patricia played the video. Richard Chen sitting in his wheelchair, speaking slowly but clearly. "I am recording this on March 15th. I am of sound mind. I am 76 years old. I have Parkinson's disease, but I am fully aware of what I'm saying. My children, Daniel and Victoria, have not visited me in 8 months. They have called twice, both times to ask about money. The only person who has cared for me, who has loved me, who has treated me like a human being, is my wife, Margaret Chen. I am leaving her my house, my trust fund, and my personal accounts. My children will inherit my business assets. That is fair. That is my choice. If anyone tries to change this will after I can no longer defend it, they are lying. Margaret deserves everything I've given her. She earned it, not with manipulation, with love." The courtroom was silent. Then Patricia presented the second will, the one Daniel and Victoria claimed Richard had signed 1 week before his death. She showed the signature, shaky, barely legible. She showed Richard's medical records from that week. Severe tremors, unable to write, unable to feed himself. She showed the nurse's notes, patient, unable to sign consent forms due to motor function loss. Then she showed the kicker. The notary who'd supposedly witnessed Richard's signature, she'd been in Hawaii that week, had never met Richard Chen, had never notarized anything for him. The will was a forgery. The judge didn't hesitate. The second will is invalid. The original will stands. Margaret Chen inherits as specified. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney for investigation of fraud and forgery. Daniel and Victoria sat frozen. Patricia wasn't done. She filed a civil suit for emotional distress, for defamation, for the months Margaret had spent being called a gold digger and a manipulator. The settlement was $750,000, plus legal fees. Margaret could have stopped there, taken the house, taken the money, lived quietly. She didn't. She sold the house, used the money to open something Richard had always talked about, a care facility for low-income Parkinson's patients, people who couldn't afford 24-hour care, people whose families had left them. She called it the Richard Chen Memory Care Center. She hired nurses, paid them well, made sure no patient ever felt like a burden, and every week she volunteered, sat with patients, held their hands during tremors, reminded them they mattered. Daniel and Victoria? The fraud investigation found enough evidence to charge them both. They pleaded guilty. No jail time, but felony records. Daniel lost his medical license. Victoria lost her real estate license. Both lost everything Richard had left them, seized as proceeds of fraud. 5 years later, Margaret stood at the opening of the second Richard Chen Memory Care Center, funded by donations, supported by grants, employing 40 people. A reporter asked her a question. "Mrs. Chen, your stepchildren called you a gold digger. They said you manipulated your husband. What do you say to that now?" Margaret smiled. "I say that Richard knew exactly what he was doing. He married a woman who loved him, and he left her the resources to help people the way she helped him. That's not manipulation. That's trust. That's love. Do you forgive them for what they tried to do?" Margaret thought about that. "I don't think about them at all. I think about the 83 patients in our care centers. I think about the nurses who have good jobs. I think about the families who don't have to choose between keeping their loved ones at home and going bankrupt. That's what Richard wanted his legacy to be. And that's what I'm building." 10 years after Richard's death, Margaret Chen was 71 years old. She ran 3 care centers, employed 200 people, cared for 300 patients a year. She never remarried, never needed to. Richard had given her everything she needed. Not money, purpose. And Daniel and Victoria? They worked retail jobs, lived in small apartments, spent the rest of their lives knowing they'd thrown away their father's love for money they never got. Sometimes betrayal destroys you. Sometimes It reveals you. Margaret Chen was revealed, and what people saw was someone who'd earned every single thing she'd been given, not by manipulation, by showing up, by staying, by loving someone when everyone else walked away. If this story touched you, share it with someone who's ever been underestimated. Hit subscribe for more stories about people who prove their worth. And drop a comment, tell me about a time someone doubted you and you proved them wrong. First person to comment gets pinned.